Welcome to the 11th session of the ECPS virtual workshop series, We the People and the Future of Democracy, Interdisciplinary Approaches. This online series follows ECPS's in-person conference at Oxford University in July 2025 and continues the vital discussions initiated there. I'm Stella Schade, an intern with ECPS, and I currently work as a research assistant for a German think tank. ECPS curates this workshop series to address one of the most pressing questions of our time: how the idea of the people shapes the fate of democracy. By examining how the people can serve as both a sword and shield, namely a democratic force and a tool of authoritarian consolidation, this series fosters interdisciplinary dialogue to better understand democratic backsliding, resilience, and the future of democracy worldwide. Today's session, Inclusion or Illusion, Narratives of Belonging, Trust, and Democracy in a Polarized Era, brings together emerging and established scholars to examine how claims of democratic inclusion are constructed and contested in contemporary politics. The panel explores how narratives of the people, social justice, institutional trust, and active citizenship can simultaneously sustain participation and produce exclusion. Through interdisciplinary and comparative perspectives, the session highlights how boundaries of belonging are negotiated and how democratic ideals may paradoxically enable populist mobilization and democratic erosion in polarized contexts. As a testament to its commitment to knowledge dissemination, ECPS is going to write a workshop report and share the video recording of this event on its website and YouTube channel. With this, I introduce the distinguished moderator, presenters, and discussants for today's session. So today's workshop is going to be moderated by Dr. Andrea Zamfira. Dr. Zamfira is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Bucharest, an associate researcher at the Regional Center for Advanced Francophone Studies in Social Sciences, and a member of the editorial board of Studia Politica, Romanian Political Science Review, and Studia Securitatis. Her research interests focus on democracy studies and ethnic studies. Said Yamour-Hamadi will be our first speaker today to discuss when identity politics and social justice procedures contribute to populism. Yamour-Hamadi is a PhD candidate at the Institute of Religious Studies, University of Montreal, Canada. His research, he's currently writing a thesis on individual understandings of social justice in the Iranian context among Shiite Muslim adults living in Tehran. His areas of interest include politics and religion, culture and religion, social inequalities, and social justice in its various forms, including the origins and history of this notion. The second presentation of today's panel will be delivered by Ariel Lam-Chan on the topic, Why Do We Trust the DMV? Exploring the drivers of institutional trust in public-facing government agencies. Chan is a third-year PhD student in the Department of Sociology at Stanford University. Her current research focuses on understanding the causes of institutional trust in U.S. public service agencies, exploring how factors such as bureaucratic performance, internal processes, and moral political disposition of workers influence public confidence in government institutions. Chan's interdisciplinary research blends sociological theory with practical policy implications, and she's dedicated to addressing pressing issues of governance, institutional trust, and social justice. Dr. Diodon Membarga will be the session's third presenter to deliver a paper titled Active Citizenship, Democracy, and Inclusive Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa, Nexus, Challenges, and Prospects for Sustainable Development. Dr. Embarga is an independent researcher. Dr. Ali Ragheb will be our fourth and last speaker, presenting a paper titled Silenced Voices in a Democratic Dawn, How the Iranian Constitutional Revolutionaries Weaponized the People Against Minorities. Dr. Ragheb is a sociologist with a PhD from the University of Tehran. His research explores economic inequality, cultural sociology, and critical theory, focusing on Iran's urban middle class. He's the author of 3 books alongside numerous peer-reviewed articles. He's a member of the Iranian Sociological Association and has held editorial roles. His work bridges critical cultural studies, historical sociology, and political economy, offering insights into inequality and social transformation. Due to the ongoing internet blockages in Iran, Dr. Ragheb might not be able to join us today, but we will show a pre-recorded video of his presentation. Following the presentations, our discussants, Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald and Dr. Russell Foster, will each offer 12 to 13 minutes of commentary and feedback. Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald is professor of political science at the University of Colorado. A specialist in comparative political behavior, much of Fitzgerald's works examines the ways in which social context shapes political attitudes and vote choice in advanced democratic societies. Her most recent book, entitled Close to Home: Local Ties and Voting Radical Right in Europe, was published in the Cambridge series in Public Opinion and Political Psychology. Fitzgerald has also been working closely with researchers at Örebro University in Sweden to understand the political behavior of young democratic citizens. Dr. Russell Foster is a senior lecturer in British and International Politics at School of Politics and Economics, King's College London. He has an interdisciplinary academic background. His current research focuses on the relationship between the far right and European identity, the far right and LGBTQ+ politics, the legacy of the British Empire in contemporary politics, and the evolving relationship between identity and politics in the UK, the EU, and beyond. As a reminder, a Q&A session will follow the discussant's feedback. Participants may submit questions via the chat box or by raising their virtual hand to ask questions live. Each presenter will then briefly respond to both the discussant's comments and the questions raised by participants. And now I give the floor to Dr. Zamfira. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella Schade. Good afternoon, everyone from Bucharest, and good morning to our American part of the team. First, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation and to say that I'm very pleased to be with you today, to be part of this panel and to have the opportunity to bring our ideas together. I find this theme of the theme of our panel to extremely compelling for the field we have been working in since July within ECPS hybrid conference titled "We the People and the Future of Democracy." I believe that this topic, inclusion or illusion, brings us closer to the explanations we are trying to find, and the papers scheduled for today will contribute to this effort, I am sure. Inclusion or illusion? It is a question, on one hand, about belonging, about individuals' feelings of belonging, feelings of inclusion or exclusion within or from within the definition of the people, of the demos, of the political community. And on the other hand, it is a question about the definers, those which are those in power to determine the official and to impose the official definitions. It is a question also about their discourses, their narratives, and the policies they introduce. I would dare to suggest that one of the implicit questions here is which subtle forms of inclusion or exclusion could be observed on the ground. And our presentations today will explore both dimensions, who are the defined and who are the definers, what are the definitions in work here. Our presenters will discuss the realities as perceived by the people and the realities of belonging, constructed by the political actors. The deplorable state of democracy today is often attributed by some scholars primarily to citizens, to their alienation, lack of trust in institutions, their difficulties in understanding the complexities of governance. On the other hand, other scholars place the blame on political parties and governing actors who no longer represent the people, demand their trust, yet gradually betrayed through a growing distance from fulfilling a voter's will. And I would add, through a persistent disregard for their concerns. The disregard for personal autonomy, for the general will, for the sovereignty of the community of citizens, and moreover, the post-democratic habit of contesting even the electoral competence of society as a whole, led scholars to speak, famous scholars, in fact, to speak about a void that is difficult to bridge between politics and society, between elites and the demos. the people. This void was generated, according to Peter Mayer, to Philip Schmidt, to Colin Crouch, generated by the decline of politics and representative institutions, grosso modo. This decline is primarily the result of the merger of the state bureaucracy and major economic actors, leading to a gradual erosion of individual freedoms and democratic sovereignty. Such changes also help explain to a large extent the growing populism and the attraction to populism, a phenomenon that, in my view, similarly to many other phenomena, nurtures dominant intellectual stereotypes today, further reproducing Western-centric or Eastern-centric reasonings and other dogmatic reasonings, and therefore totally evading authentic, accurate, critical analysis. Against the already established general research practice, Peter Mayer, for instance, suggested that the new populism should be examined first as an associated symptom of de-democratization and second as its cause. My last idea here is about militant democracy, because I want to complete somehow this image I extracted from my readings. An increasing number of publications today address this concept of militant democracy. There are scholars who view it as a necessary solution to navigate democratic crisis, while others see it as a potentially decisive undermining of democratic principles by endorsing restrictive and defensive measures against groups deemed anti-democratic. This model risks curtailing freedoms and pluralism, paradoxically narrowing the very political community it seeks to protect. This raises a pressing question: does militant democracy and other similar models truly safeguard democratic values, or does it move us toward a form of governance that further excludes the demos it claims to serve? This was my overall assessment. And with these remarks as opening assessment for our panel, I am pleased to welcome our first presenter to take the floor. I am not sure if Said Yarma Homadi is with us.
Professor Zanfer, unfortunately, he is not available right now, but thankfully, Ali Raghib accessed the internet. And if you see suitable, we can invite him to present his presentation first, and then we can go on. If Said attending later, we can give the floor to him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ali Raghib is in the fourth in the line, but right now he's here. Dr. Raghib.
Should I share my screen now?
Professor Zanfra.
The next, so we will start with the second presenter.
Yeah, okay.
This is a proposal. Oh, then, sorry. Then I am pleased to invite our second speaker, Ariel Lam Chan, with a very interesting title, Why Do We Trust the DMEF? Or did you change a bit the title? Can you explain us?
Yeah, I did. I did. So this abstract is from my previous version, and since then I've worked on changing my presentation, which I'll share with y'all right now. So my presentation now is titled, What Does the Public Want? A Multidimensional Analysis of Cues in the Administrative State. And compared to the previous version of the abstract, this one is a new round of data that I analyzed and tested with 4 cues instead of 6 different cues for the conjoint experiment. So I think this version is a bit more streamlined and it's still a work in progress, and I have to work on consolidating my writing, but hopefully I can tell a convincing story that ties together my finding and previous literature in the field to capture what the public wants from the public sector. So I will go ahead and begin my presentation. So I'll first introduce what the context of this presentation is. Um, and so the administrative state is also the face of the public sector. It's primarily experienced through interaction with street level bureaucrats. So these are people like police officer, teachers, welfare officers, and the primary face of the government for really most citizens. So when you think about the government, you don't think about just the Congress, or that's very abstract for most people to think about. Instead, your impression is policemen that you've interacted with. So that's why I titled the DMV, which is where most Americans get their driver's license, and most bureaucratic hangups happen there. Um, so earlier, it was mentioned that we want to talk about the problem of the defined and the definer. And so what my question that I'm raising is that while a lot of existing literature on administrative burden focuses on frictions like learning and compliance costs that reduce service take-up, that service take-up itself is an actual enrollment or complete use of the service, and we don't actually know what are the cues that encourage people to even move from avoidance to engagement with these services. So, as I mentioned, take-up and case completions are tied to eligibility and constraints that affect people's real-life interactions. Um, and the other problem with that's one problem with measuring outcomes or measuring take up as an outcome. The other problem of survey is that survey tends to measure people's attitudes by capturing their opinions, but there's less decision making that's involved in the process. And so my project proposes a conjoint experiment, which is a way to address those two shortcomings. And I argue that in this survey that whether people anticipate that we treat it fairly, respectfully, and impartially would drive their subjective willingness to engage. And so by introducing a conjuring experiment, I also introduced the concept of approach intention. So that's the way where citizens vote with their feet in everyday encounters with the state. So what that means is I'm creating this scenario where, let's say you're the participant in my survey, in my conjoint experiment. You're in the middle between two public service offices. And based on the cues that you see, let's say you're on your phone, you're looking on Google, see the ratings, right? Based on the cues that you see from ratings, then you choose to walk to one or the other. That's what I mean, just approach intention, like how willing you are to approach one office over another based on the signals that they emit. So the goal of the study is to capture treatment experience, expectations that cuts across social group without biasing by prior experiences or bucketing people off by types of services. So now I'll go into introducing the theoretical tension. So really the question is what drives legitimacy? So we have two camps here. One is the classic performance trust theory that argues that legitimacy is a product of transactional effectiveness, and it prioritizes outcome like speed and accuracy. So this is a camp that we would think of when we think about the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency campaign. Um, on the other hand, we have the procedural justice theory, or also known as the relational legitimacy. So this camp, influenced by Tyler in the 1990s, suggests that citizens actually value fair, respectful treatment and transparent decision-making process as much as or even more than the actual results. So then my study kind of sits on top of these two fields of literature. And I'm asking, so there's these competitions between what people care about. And I want to use these competing accounts to build a framework that looks at what the public actually wants when they're presented with competing signals about the public sector. Okay, so now I'll go into discussing my experiment, which is a paraconjoint design. So I use a nationally representative survey experiment with 1,073 respondents from the US. And so across the two, they each evaluate three tasks. So each task is a public service agency, and there's 14 of them. So they evaluate three out of the 14 agencies, and for each person, you see two offices. So if you're a participant in my research, you have to go through three different tasks, and each task you see two different offices. And so that gives you a total of 6,000, a little bit more evaluations for me in total, right? And so the respondents evaluate agencies across 14 agencies from the DMV to Social Security Administration and welfare offices. And the attributes were randomized across the two dimensions that I'm trying to measure, which is the process queue. Process queue include how respectfully do they feel like they're treated, and also how fairly do they feel that they're treated. Outcome is how efficient the office is and how well they performed on handling the case, achieving things that you've expected them to do. And so I gave them statements for each cues, and the statements are created to mirror how people would, if you go onto Google, it would be a short statement about like, oh, like this office was great, like I got my services achieved, or everyone's very respectful. So that the type of statement that you would see, and it was validated through two rounds of pretest and one round of full-scale survey testing before this final sample. And so, yeah. And I can now introduce some key findings. So I started my project with a couple of different hypotheses. So one of them being the major one being how process compares to outcome. And that kind of drives home the fundamental question of what do people actually want when they visit these public sector offices? So, my main effect shows that all the positive cues significantly increase approach intentions significantly, which is not surprising. So everyone, if they see a higher, like, so there is statements, the high statement being that the office has done a great job. And the baseline statement being that the office didn't achieve what I expected them to do. And so obviously all people, when they see the higher performance statement, they are more likely to choose an office. But what I found that is interesting is the ordinal binary split. So for a robustness check, I modeled my outcome in two ways. So first outcome is the subjective confidence rating. So that means I'm looking at, say you're a participant and I'm asking you to choose how likely you are to visit Office A versus Office B. And so in this ordinal scale, I'm asking people to choose Office A, probably Office B, or Office B. And so in that scenario, found that consideration out of the process cues ties with efficiency out of the outcome cues. But when they're forced to make a binary choice, so that's when I change the outcome to Office A versus Office B, or basically that's just the way I modeled it. Citizens actually prioritize instrumental outcome cues over process. So that's something to think about. And the second thing is that fairness cue remains very stable across both measurement construct. So what I think of it is that it's a foundation, a stable foundation that predicts legitimacy. And there is no finding of process Q being more statistically significant than outcome Qs. So that again challenges what I've entered the paper with the hypothesis of. So the next finding is that the presence of positive process cues amplifies the impact of favorable outcome. So having, seeing the high outcome cues and seeing the high process cues together actually gives the participant a likelihood of choice by 6%, which is beyond the purely additive effects. So when profile is both highly proficient, which is a high outcome cue, and highly respectful, which is a high process cue, then the resulting likelihood of choice is boosted by 5.2 to 6%, compared to the purely additive effect. And so that to me suggests that the relational capacity acts as a multiplier for operational performance. So finally, this is what I entered the paper most interested in, which is the subgroup, the social group differences. And this is a very more sociological take on the finding on the approach of the conjoint experiment. So I talked a lot in my paper about the different types of administrative burdens, one being racialized burden. And so the hypothesis is that for a minority group, they tend to be more avoidant and they prefer relational cues. That's what they prioritize. And also people in the vulnerable groups, such as those with frequent welfare contact. But I actually, my finding actually rejected that. So there was no statistically higher preference for process cue over outcomes. And the other question that I had, which was entering it, I expected that Democrats would probably prefer relational cues based on the literature, and conservatives prefer the process cue, right? That kind of ties back to what the whole Doge campaign was about. And I was like, oh, that's only reasonable way to think about this. But actually, contrary to my expectation, Democrats have a significantly higher preference for outcome over process, and that's statistically significant, which reflects a potential shift towards demanding a more high capacity, high performance state in a polarized environment. And then finally, what my finding did confirm is that those with high income and highly educated backgrounds also significantly prioritize results over relational ease, which is confirming the literature. So I'm gonna end my presentation by sharing my broader takeaway, but I would love for people to tell me if this is a convincing story and how I can tie this all my thoughts and finding into one coherent story that will compel you. So I think that the public trust in the state relies on a dual expectation of competence and procedural justice, while efficiency and results serve as heuristics for immediate choice, which is in this case the context of my conjoint experiment. I think that fairness and honesty, which are things that are captured in people's open-ended responses, actually remain the aspirational bedrock for institutional trust, as respondents have told me in their own words at the end of the survey experiment. So my broader takeaway is that agencies should invest in relational capacity, not just as a luxury, but as a critical tool that will narrow disparity and strengthen the social fabric between citizens and institutions. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel Lamchan. We will now invite Dr. Diodone Barga. Are you ready? And you
Yes.
have also 15 minutes. I'm not sure we have mentioned it before, so we have 15 minutes for each presentation.
Okay, no problem for me. First of
Thank you.
Okay, no problem for me. First of
Thank you.
all, please allow me to appreciate and congratulate the ECPS Center for this workshop. To me, as a sub-Saharan a researcher from the global south is very, very relevant, important for us to share our insight and also to learn from others. So thank you for this opportunity. My research project is titled Active Citizenship, Inclusive Governance and Democratic Resilience in Sub-Saharan Africa, Nexus, Challenges and Pathway for Sustainable Development. So allow me to briefly present my findings from a comparative and empirical study exploring how civic participation can influence democratic governance in polarized environment or context. And as you know, Sub-Saharan Africa context is a context where democratic transition remain unveiled. For those who know the context, we can observe increasing political polarization, declining institutional trust, and growing youth and women mobilization, often amplified by digital platforms. And from this context, the main questions is how can active citizenship strengthen democracy without reinforcing exclusionary political narratives? So before to continue, allow me to agree on what is the active citizenship definition can be. And from this understanding, our presentation will be more understandable. So for us, according to the Canadian government definition, with an author like Bickmore in 2014, active citizenship describes the commitment of individuals or citizens to actively participate or contribute to the public governance of their respective context. And our theory and hypotheses are that the analysis combines deliberative democracy, participatory governance, and constructivist populist theory. And also the participation can enhance accountability and legitimacy, but also create political division when narratives of the people, what is the people, become exclusionary. So our main questions is first, how can active citizenship influence governance and trust? Second, what structural barriers limit inclusive participation in sub-Saharan African context? And the last one is what policy pathways strengthen democracy resilience? So our methodology is a qualitative, comparative, and empirical approach, combining interviews and observation implications, policy analysis, and other literature review across 5 countries, especially Kenya, Ghana, Ethiopia, Senegal, and Cameroon. And in terms of main findings from these country cases and our global analysis, our findings show that civic, please go to the findings slide, sorry. Yeah, next, yeah, thanks. Our findings can show that civic engagement strengthens accountability and policy performance in our context, globally in sub-Saharan Africa context. But especially in Kenya, we have this observation where youth and women influence climate and inclusive governance. In Ghana also, we have participatory budgeting increasing transparency. In Ethiopia, it's the same. We have a sort of community participation, enhancing social protections. And in Senegal, we have this digital participation, youth mobilization that drive political polarization. And in Cameroon, my context, we have this civic engagement that persists despite institutional constraint, meaning that in sub-Saharan African context, we have this great mobilization, but with a sort of instrumentalization. We have young people sometimes who are just instrumentalized because of the opportunity of digital networks, digital platforms, social media, and some political leaders that are able to mobilize them. But sometimes all these young people, this mobilization is just spontaneous, are not able to understand the real stake, the real challenges, but are just there to make noise or to support one leader or another. So from this finding, we can notice two perspectives. We have one part populism vis-a polarization. So in this context, citizen mobilization can empower democratic participation, but also reinforce populist narratives. And also we have digital activists that can accelerate both inclusion and fragmentation, making institutional trust a central challenge. As you know, in Europe, there you have racism, but here in our context, we have a lot of ethnicities, or if you like, tribalism. It's like racism, but at the tribe level. So sometimes the engagement in politics is just linked to the tribute of the leader. So at the end of the process, we have a lot of instrumentalization instead of inclusion. And from this instrumentalization, we have this exclusion, and also we have this kind of exclusion at the end of the process and illegitimacy of some of the governance or government or leaders. So in terms of political implication, policy priorities include institutionalizing participatory governance, strengthening civic education, supporting youth and women leadership, ensuring digital participation and inclusive digital participation, and protecting civic space aligned with the SDG 16, which promote participatory institution, meaning that this session especially is for us to share some insight about how we can improve an accurate, inclusive or active citizenship or inclusive participation of youth, women, and other marginalized groups in governance and democratic process. So in terms of conclusion or key takeaway, we can say that active citizenship can strengthen democracy only when supported by inclusive institutions, structural participation, civic freedoms. And for us, Sub-Saharan Africa context offers valuable lessons on democratic innovation and community-driven governance in polarized context, because our context is that of multi-ethnic and multi-tribe reality. So that is basically our findings, and I am happy to have shared it with you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diodone Mbarga. I think very interesting questions we'll receive at the end about these two first presentations. Meanwhile, I would ask Mr. Kenneth, who should be the third presenter.
Yeah, thank you. The third one, the Dr. Ali Ragib, but he tried many times to join us, but unfortunately he couldn't. His attempts became unconclusive because of the situation in Iran. So we will share his short pre-recorded video right now. All discussants and all participants could make some assessments and feedback. So we will report it, and I think he will benefit from that. So
Okay.
I am now.
Hello to everyone. I regret that I cannot be present with you today. This absence is not a choice, but the result of an enforced internet blackout in Iran. One more instrument of control deployed at a moment of profound national crisis. In less than a single year, we have once again been cast under the shadow of war, while at home the Islamic Republic has responded to popular protests with systematic violence, killing many who demanded nothing more than the most basic political rights. The title of this conference coincides with the present situation in Iran in a stark and literal way. We, the people, is not, for Iranians, a constitutional abstraction or a historical echo. It's a lived condition, written daily in resistance, in loss, and too often in blood. A people caught between two monsters, domestic tyranny on one side and the foreign aggression on the other, struggling to carve out a fragile path toward democracy. The Iranian constitutional revolution of the early 20th century marked the first large-scale attempt to introduce constitutional rule, parliament, and popular sovereignty in Iran. For a global audience, it's important to stress that this revolution emerged in a society governed by a patrimonial monarchy, where political legitimacy flowed from the Shah, and society was structured around ra'iyat, or peasants, rather than citizens. There was no prior experience of mass political representation, equal citizenship, or institutionalized pluralism. What makes this constitutional revolution historically significant is the breadth of its early mobilizations. Tens of thousands participated in protests and sit-ins, particularly in Tehran and Tabriz, representing artisans, laborers, merchants, clerics, intellectuals, and segments of the urban poor. Religious minorities such as Armenians, Jews, and Zoroastrians also participated through financial support, local activism, and political engagement. In this early phase, the people emerged as a powerful political symbol, capable of uniting diverse social groups against arbitrary rule. Yet, this success quickly turned into failure. Less than 2 years after the establishment of the parliament, the counter-revolution of 1908 encountered limited mass resistance. When the parliament was shelled, the crowds that had once filled the streets were largely absent. So, this study asks why a revolution that succeeded through mass participation was unable to defend itself once it achieved power. Most existing explanations emphasize external intervention, especially Russian and British influence, or internal structural weaknesses such as low literacy or institutional fragility. While these factors matter, they don't explain why popular mobilization itself collapsed. My argument is that the revolution failed because its leadership deliberately narrowed the political meaning of the people after victory, excluding many of the groups that had initially constituted revolutionary coalition. Theoretically, I approach the people as a political construction rather than a fixed social entity. Drawing on Ernesto Laclau, I treat it as an empty signifier that temporarily unified heterogeneous demands. Also, Jacques Rancière helps conceptualize how marginalized groups briefly became politically visible during the revolution before being excluded again. Furthermore, Partha Chatterjee's distinction between civil society and political society clarifies how elites recognize some actors as legitimate citizens while governing others through control and exclusion. Methodologically, This study is based on qualitative analysis of parliamentary debates, constitutional drafts, electoral laws, petitions, underground pamphlets, police and intelligence reports, newspapers, memoirs, and visual sources. These materials allowed me to trace how inclusion during mobilization was transformed into exclusion during consolidation. The revolutionary coalition was internally diverse and unstable. For example, intellectuals emphasized law and representation, while merchants sought security for property and trade. Clerics were divided between constitutionalist and conservative factions, and the Yerganpur joined largely in response to economic desperation, such as bread shortages, unemployment, and insecurity. During mobilization, these divergent expectations were held together through deliberately ambiguous promises. But after victory, priorities shifted sharply. Revolutionary leaders increasingly framed mass participation as disorderly and dangerous. Stability, property rights, and elite consensus took precedence over social justice and coalition maintenance. This shift had profound consequences for multiple groups, beginning with Diyarbakir. Parliament largely ignored economic grievances, producing disillusionment and political volatility. Many among the poor were later mobilized by royalist and clerical forces through material incentives and religious appeals. Women also experienced systematic exclusion despite active participation. They organized boycotts, demonstrations, armed resistance, and political petitions. Yet, revolutionary discourse addressed only men, and the electoral law explicitly excluded women from suffrage. Women's revolutionary participation was thus transformed into post-revolutionary invisibility. Moreover, the exclusion of religious minorities was equally consequential and more structurally entrenched. Early constitutional debates promised equality, but under pressure from conservative clerics, the constitution defined political belonging primarily in Islamic terms. So, Armenians, Jews, and Zoroastrians faced legal restriction, social discrimination, and just symbolic inclusion at best. Only Zoroastrians eventually secured a single reserved parliamentary seat, while others remained politically peripheral. The revolutionary concept of the people was thus implicitly constructed as Muslim, Shia, and Persian-speaking, rendering minorities conditionally visible and easily expendable. This religious exclusion wasn't accidental. It reflected a strategic compromise between secular constitutionalists and conservative clerics, where minority rights were sacrificed to preserve elite unity. In doing so, the revolution abandoned one of its most inclusive promises and fractured its social base along sectarian lines. Exclusion was further institutionalized through the electoral law and parliamentary structure. Suffrage was restricted to propertied Muslim men from a limited set of recognized classes. Representation favored Tehran over other provinces, excluding tribes, peasants, and ethnic minorities. Together, these legal and spatial exclusions transformed the people from revolutionary coalition into a narrow political category. At the same time, revolutionary discourse shifted from mobilization to contempt. Elites increasingly portrayed the masses as ignorant, irrational, or obstacles to progress. Popular political tools were criminalized, and participation from below was framed as a threat to order. This performative contempt justified demobilization and repression. At the final level, when counter-revolutionary forces regrouped, the parliament stood isolated. But the collapse of popular support wasn't due to mass ignorance or cultural backwardness, but to systematic exclusion, unmet economic expectations, and political betrayal. Groups that had made victory possible were denied political belonging. It's obvious that this trajectory is not unique. Similar patterns can be observed in the French Revolution and the Young Turk Revolution, where inclusive populist mobilization was followed by elite consolidation and narrow definitions of citizenship. These comparisons suggest a general lesson. Revolutions that rely on broad coalitions cannot survive if they consolidate power by excluding those coalitions. The enduring lesson of the Iranian constitutional revolution is therefore universal. The people cannot remain a temporary slogan. Without institutionalized pluralism across class, gender, religion, and region, revolutionary victories remain fragile. Exclusion may create short-term order, but it ultimately undermines the very foundations of political change. At the end, I conclude by expressing my sincere gratitude to the organizers and by honoring the memory of those freedom fighters who have fallen in these dark days. Their voices endure even when ours are forcibly silenced. Thank you for your time.
We thank also Mr. Ali Raheb. Well, we are sorry we couldn't manage to participate today. We have now the final presentation.
Unfortunately, this was the last. Mr.
It
Said
was the last.
Mohammed
Okay.
couldn't attend.
Okay, so we have only 3 presentations today. We will start the session dedicated to discussions right now. We invite, and I'm pleased to invite Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Hi. I wonder, Dr. Foster, I think you had a conflict of some sort. If you wanted to go first, if that makes your day better, I'm happy to flip spots with you if you'd like.
That would be very kind if that would be okay with the organizers.
Okay, then we will start with Mr. Russell Foster with his first series of questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organisers and to Dr. Fitzgerald for swapping over. It's a very busy time of the term, and there's a lot of meetings. So I would like to thank the organisers for putting together this exceptional panel, and to our speakers. To speak very quickly to Professor Zamfira's introduction, all of these papers address what you identify as the void between politicians. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Oh, you can, excellent. Sorry, the internet goes bad here when it's raining. That all of these papers speak very well to what you identify as the void between politicians and the demos in multiple different contexts. And I liked your discussion of militant democracy, a darkly fascinating concept which speaks to Karl Popper's paradox of intolerance, that enacting militant democracy may very well end up in excluding the demos which democracy claims to serve, as these papers have indicated. Arguably, it would be necessary and an indictment of the sorry state that democracy is in. So, to speak to the papers, first of all, to Dr. Anders Chan over at Stanford, I thought this was an excellent paper. It's a very rich analysis of access to public services in the administrative state, and citizens' perceptions of the efficiency of public services. It's very refreshing to see work being done on street level bureaucracy as opposed to the elite level. I particularly liked it because I'm currently in the process of getting a new passport. And so the paper really spoke to me about the Byzantine and psychological aspects of the administrative state. I did like the inclusion of psychology and the psychological costs as a barrier to citizen participation. Citizen perceptions of government legitimacy. In a couple of questions, in the construct, you talk about citizens voting with their feet. I thought this was very interesting, but I wonder if this is the correct phrasing, because with something like the DMV or these state administrative organizations, these are captive bureaucracies. There's nowhere else to go. So is this necessarily a case of voting with their feet? But I did really enjoy the discussion of Doge as an example of instrumental legitimacy versus relational. And I wondered if the example of Doge and its spectacular failure actually brings into question the very concept of instrumental legitimacy itself, and what other institutions might be able to illustrate the workings of instrumental legitimacy. The study builds upon a very impressive corpus of literature to identify a gap. And I thought that the theoretical framework is highly advanced, drawing upon multiple relevant theoretical models from performance trust to performance-centered legitimacy, with the inclusion of these somatic and sociological characteristics, such as race and racialized burdens, which are impacting citizens trying to seek assistance from the state. Because this is a particular issue in many countries, as the papers have demonstrated. And I think that your paper does a great job of demonstrating how digital and technological barriers to accessing services disproportionately affect citizens from minority racial groups, something that we've seen in biopolitics throughout the 20th century. And I wondered if it could be interesting in the paper to expand a little more on the similar patterns that affect citizen age groups. This comes up in secondary hypothesis 5 within the paper, because there's a lot of discussion, I think still not enough discussion in the literature, not your literature, the literature generally, a lot of discussion about generational divides as a core factor in the rise of populist politics between people of different age cohorts. And I wondered if this would speak to what you identify as subjective confidence rating, and whether citizens' perceptions of process and outcome are dependent not just on the institutions, but they're also dependent on these things like race and age. You know, if younger people are maybe less likely to see the administrative state as responsive as opposed to their older peers. I did greatly enjoy the methodology, and a very broad data set has been engaged with. I think it will be helpful in the paper to clarify the time frame and the criteria that were chosen for the 1,400 or so participants. In the paper, you identify 14 different agencies. I wonder if it could be expressly stated which agencies and why they were chosen. And another thing that I think could be greatly beneficial is to give an outline as to the agencies you've chosen. Are they all operating at the same level of the state? So in this United States context, are these institutions all federal? Are they state? Are they local? Are they a mixture of them? Because I wonder if perceptions of institutional competence and relational legitimacy differ for federal agencies as opposed to state agencies, as opposed to local or regional. I really enjoyed the use of ChatGPT to code these. I think it will be helpful to put in a couple more sentences to explain why AI was chosen for this coding. And I think it will be useful to also know exactly what prompts were in. And forgive me if they're in the appendix. I didn't take a look at the appendix, because the paper says that the prompts are based on a study from 1996, which is long before AI. So I just wonder if they could be expressly stated. But overall, yeah, I thought this was an absolutely fascinating paper, which speaks to the mechanisms by which populism can emerge at the very everyday levels. Moving on to Dr. Mbaga's fantastic piece on active citizenship in sub-Saharan Africa. It's superb to get a paper from the Global South by a Global South scholar, because the embedded understanding of the context is something that is sorely lacking in Global North universities and contexts. So it's superb to see this embedded knowledge coming through. And I enjoyed the discussion of rising polarization, uneven democratic consolidation, and declining trust in institutions, and also expansion of youth civic engagement. And similarly to the first paper, I wonder if we could give a little more detail on what time frame is being looked at. Is this a recent phenomenon? Is this a post-pandemic phenomenon? Is this going back to the late 20th century? And also a geographical dimension. So you did outline your case studies from West Africa and Equatorial Africa. And I wonder if a little bit could be said about differences and similarities between the geographical case studies, because it could be very different for, say, North Africa or other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And I enjoyed the discussion of digital communications and spreading polarization. And it got me thinking as to whether there might be a linguistic element to this, a language component of, do we see the same phenomenon playing out in English-speaking and French-speaking populations in West and Equatorial Sub-Saharan Africa? And it was this would speak to another element I thought would be fascinating to look at, which is already there in the paper, that a core part of populism across the world is this blaming by populist actors, blaming internal elites and external forces. Now, so much has been done on the global North context of who gets blamed. And I wondered, who is this in the sub-Saharan context? Who are the populists blaming for society's ills and problems? So, for example, we've seen a trend in recent years in the Sahel towards blaming problems on France and the United States and the United Kingdom, but at the same time embracing Russia as a global North white society, which is being framed as some sort of a liberator compared to other global North societies. And I wondered if that is manifest across the selection of case studies you've chosen, or what other foreign actors are being blamed by populist actors. And similarly, who are the internal elites who are being blamed? So I think that your paper does a fantastic job of juxtaposing the racism that we see in global North societies with the tribalism that is seen in sub-Saharan African societies. I think this is a fascinating comparison. And I wonder, are populist leaders in sub-Saharan Africa, are they targeting tribal elites or tribal communities as the other who is blamed for everything? And in the discussion you were giving on the use of digital communications, I was fascinated by how this might play out with the dynamic of class, particularly as you have so much emphasis on gender and youth engagement in this. And this is not my area, so I might be wrong about this, but I would imagine that in many societies, women and girls are going to have less access to direct digital participation because of educational obstacles or because of pressures on time and economics, as opposed to male or middle class citizens in these societies who may well have more access to literacy, to digital devices, and thereby are more exposed to this sort of polarization than female or working class citizens who may not have as much access. But this is not my field. I might be completely wrong. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating paper, and the core for me was this juxtaposition of racism in global North societies and tribalism in the global South. I thought that was wonderful. Finally, because I know I'm on 10 minutes now, Dr. Ragheb's piece, and I think I can speak for us all that we wish him very well, and we're very grateful for him sending across this pre-record. I hope he's staying safe over there. I thought that this was a very, very impressive piece on an overlooked constitutional revolution, which honestly, before I received this paper, I'd never even heard of it. My history teacher would not be proud of me at the moment. I think it offers a very sophisticated argument which weaves Western concepts from political science into a society and a historical period, which on the surface may appear to be an alien habit, and that Western scholars are just crowbarring in these theories. But the paper does a very sophisticated job of showing the parallels within Iranian society. And I enjoyed the paper's focus on challenging these classic orthodox Western explanations for failed revolution, foreign intervention, elite factionalism, extreme ideologies, and that instead the paper argues that the revolution's leaders adopted a very excessively narrow and unsustainable model of the people at the core of populism, of what we studied. And in a grim irony, the paper is arguing that what those leaders did was actually replicate what the power brokers of Western Edwardian societies were doing 100 years ago, of saying, well, we speak for the people, and by the people, they mean wealthy male property owners. So I thought that was a fascinating parallel between different societies in this time period and today. Theoretically, very rich paper. I really enjoyed the use of Leclau's empty signifiers to look at the qualitative approach. And a great theme that I got out of this was that the paper is moving away from what J.G. Herder called Außenpolitik, of looking at the high-level politics of parliaments and elites, towards what Reinhard Koselleck termed Alltagsgeschichte, of the everyday stories, of looking at the politics of the street, as we saw in the other two papers, as opposed to the politics at the kitchen table, as opposed to the politics at the conference table. And this was very richly reinforced with Chatterjee's differentiation between civic and political. I thought that was wonderful. I greatly enjoyed the part of the paper in which the author engages with an otherwise sparse literature on the period of this period in Iranian history. And I thought of particular note was the translatability issue, because we talk about the nation so much in English language scholarship. And I think that the author did a very interesting job of identifying how this doesn't translate easily into Farsi. And I think that it could be strengthened even more by expanding on this distinction between Melat versus Mardon, of how to translate the people and who counts as the nation. A very interdisciplinary theoretical framework, building on sociology and political science with performativity and critical historiography. One thing that I think could be strengthened, similar to the other papers, would be a bit more detail on where these sources were drawn from. So the author does a great job of arguing for the use of everyday diaries, accounts, letters, posters, photographs. Where were these sourced from, and according to what criteria? Where are they located? Are they online? Are they in physical archives? Were there any issues of legibility or translatability for documents from nearly 120 years ago? And could that influence the study? And I think that a fascinating potential area that was alluded to in this paper, there's so much work being done on an urban-rural divide in manifestations of populism. And this paper hinted towards an urban-urban divide. And I wonder if there could be a bit more said about, yeah, sure, there's an urban-rural divide in this period between Tehran and the provinces, but what about between Tehran and the other cities of Iran 100 years ago? Was this a phenomenon found in the metropolitan core and in the rural regions? Or were there differences with what was happening in other major cities in Iran, as we've seen in recent weeks? I think that this would strengthen an already very, very rich paper. I think the conclusion was superbly illustrative and can go a long way towards helping us to understand subsequent uprisings in Iran from 1979 to 2026. So I'll leave it there with a conclusion that all three of these papers, I think, were absolutely spectacular, theoretically rich, robustly put together, and very, very great potential for advancing the corpus of knowledge on the great crisis of our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell Foster. Thank you for your very rich insights and interesting questions. I hope Mr. Ali Raheb will have the occasion to follow our session online, and in this way he will get your comments, suggestions, and insights. Thank you to Dr. Russell Foster. And now I'd like to invite our second discussant, Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald, for
Thank
a
you very
second
much.
series of questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing and being here in this space where we are exploring such an incredibly important set of topics. And I feel fortunate to be a part of this. And even just sitting here, I'm learning so much from the discussion. Dr. Foster, you just blew my mind with urban divide. So that's something I get to think about today that I didn't expect. So thank you for that very much. I think when I look at these papers and I sort of absorb the presentations, the thing that strikes me is we have these really crucial, giant, important concepts: legitimacy, accountability, transparency, exclusion, and inclusion. And we're weaving those together with daily experiences, with everyday. I love this street level angle. I just think it's brilliant. And I think what we see here is so many extraordinary and diverse examples of how that kind of experience shapes the way we perceive institutions, the way we think about the rules of the game, the way we think they apply to us, the extent to which people feel they belong or don't belong or are seen or matter. And I think those things are just absolutely crucial. And I'm fortunate to be part of this conversation. I would like to echo so much of what Dr. Foster brought to the table in terms of overall reactions and some specific questions. I'll tighten this up a bit because I know Q&A is one of our favorite things that we get to do in these particular contexts. But I will say that, again, overall, please feel free to reach out to me if you have follow-up questions. I have some citations to share with folks in case they want them. And big picture, I'm a political scientist, so in some respects, I am qualified to comment on this work, and in other ways, it's bordering on malpractice because I don't really fully have a sense of the overall intellectual context for some of this work. So, there's primarily I focus on political behavior and regular folks. So I feel good in that space. So that's all. Take all of this with a grain of salt. Okay, so the Ariel M. Chen paper is very exciting, and the project is really cool, and you did a great job presenting. What does the public want? Yes, let's find out, and let's figure out a way to give it to them if it's within reason. And so I think one of the things that I really appreciated about this paper is I think your conceptual development of this concept of approach intention is really interesting. I hadn't seen that before, and I think there's something there that is tapping into that nexus, again, between an individual and sort of public services, the state, however you want to think about it. And so I want to encourage you to work on that and flesh that out further as you move forward, because I think there's something new and really sort of intuitively rich about that concept. There's some work in political science that you might want to engage with that I think would broaden your audience a bit. That there's sort of been a evolution in the last couple decades in my field where we're trying to wrestle with what politics is, how we define it. And there's been some interesting work on sort of expanding it to include public service delivery, that this too is sort of that end result. We focus so much on making the rules, and then sort of we lose track of that end result, that communication with regular folks. And so I think you could bring some of that in and really tie in some work that's a little edgy, maybe in political science, but I think it would be cool for your framing. And so I'm happy to send you some citations on that. One of the things that the folks who have built that sort of end side of politics out, that sort of service component out, have found a lot of differences by gender. And I'm interested that gender is not, much of a highlight in terms of your results, but it might be something you want to toy with as you move forward with the project. That on average, not making gross generalizations here, but the data show us that on average, men and women engage with different kinds of services, and that when we come to questions about political knowledge, women tend to know a whole lot about where you go to get stuff done than men. Men tend to think more about political parties and elections, and women tend to think about how they intersect on a daily basis with the state. And so I think there might be something there that you could explore. It might not be gender. I also agree with Dr. Foster that generational component, I think, could be really interesting for future exploration. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking, I wonder if there's some really interesting work too in political science, I think social science more generally, about like the gender of the interviewer. I don't know if you've seen like interviewer effects. And it made me think about I wonder if the sort of social characteristics of the people, let's say, behind the desk shape the way that people experience that. Do they look like me? Do they not look like me? Are they my age roughly? Do they, speak like I do? I mean, I just think there might be something there. Again, future exploration, not anything that you have to put into this paper, because this paper is really good. So I want to just sort of flag some of those things as maybe food for thought moving forward. And then I love that you're working with Michael Lipsky. I think there's something really exciting about exploring something that is so important on a daily basis, but does not end up in the headlines. And I think that this is an absolutely exciting space to be working in. And there's sort of a classic view that maybe this isn't a very exciting area of research. And I would say, no, this is really, really exciting and really cool to see. And so I'm going to encourage you to stay on this track if it's something that is inspiring you, because it's certainly inspiring me. Questions for you? I do think expectations of the state. You have a sort of dimension of this where you talk about partisanship, that partisans are going to have, different expectations. I think there's something really cool you could expand there too. And it's a little mean of me to suggest that, gosh, you could run this in Canada and it would be so interesting to see if you get like wildly different, even in the qualitative comments. I would love to see this expanded. Talk to me, we'll make it happen. You don't have to do it all yourself. But I just think there's something really neat about a potential comparative lens here that would be fantastic. So those are my comments on that piece. And that is probably the one that I have the most to offer on. So, but I will move on to Dr. Mbarga's work, which I just find ambitious and expansive and smart and timely and important. And I'm really excited to see where this work goes as well. I think that the piece to this that I find the most interesting, that I would love to hear more about, is the digital polarization. I just think we do not understand this landscape as much as we need to. And it is so vital to the way that people experience each other and the way they experience their governments. And so that is a piece that I want to just say, please keep working and tell us more, because I'm dying to know. Both its effects and its causes are things that I'm puzzling over myself. And so this concept of inclusive digital governance has me really, really excited. And I see a place where a major contribution could come from that as you're developing it and working on it. So I would love to hear more of it. Your work made me think a bit about research that's been done on the local level in India related to gender and leadership in village governing structures. And so I have some suggestions that I'm happy to send for just sort of different contexts in the ways that we might see complementary work that you're really speaking to and taking to a new level and sort of elevating in a certain way. And I also think this concept of the way we structure our institutions and the way that shapes political participation is so incredibly important. And I thought of Sherry Berman's work on Weimar Germany And so those are some touchstones that I think, again, would sort of bring this work into broader audiences, which I think it deserves. And so I'm happy to share those as well. And then I will move on. My time is running short. Dr. Regeb, yes, I am humbled by this. I am humbled by the work, the luxury that I have to do my work in a safe space is brought even more cogently to my attention through this paper and the presentation and his inability to be here with us today. If there's a way, Dr. Knez, to share, to email him and share my comments, I would love to try to do that. So
I will share with you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. And not in a way that gets, I don't want to cause trouble for him. But I will say, just for our own conversation as a group here, that I was humbled by, yes, my lack of knowledge of this revolution. And so I read this twice, and the first time I read it was just as a learner, absolutely just a passive recipient of information, because I was really riveted, and I was a little humbled by my lack of knowledge of this. And so going back through, I had to try to do my job here, have a bit more of a discerning approach, but that was hard, because I think the theoretical framework is really, really nice. I think that explanatory framework of, I want to show this to graduate students in my program for how you set up. Here's what everyone else is focused on. Here's what they're missing. And here's how it completely reshapes our understanding of a massive event. And so I just want to, applaud that really tight, really effective framing that helped me understand it, not just as a recipient, but as a practitioner. And so I appreciated that so much. And something that this paper reminded me of was the fluidity of the label of the people. And in fact, the language that Dr. Regeb used was the slogan of the people. And I just think that is so incredibly important, the way rhetorically that can be weaponized, and the way that can be shifted and changed even in the course of a relatively short period of time, depending on who is in leadership. And so I would love to read more about that and know more about that, but it reminded me that is something that is really just important and can be so pernicious. And then I am struck by the direct implications that Dr. Regeb draws on how the conceptual boundaries around the people are drawn, and how weighty that can be for historical events and for regular people, of course. And so I will stop there with just applause and appreciation. And thank you, everyone, for listening to my various thoughts on 3 really extraordinary projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald, for your stimulating and valuable insights, for your questions also. Now we should move to questions from participants, but I do not know if it is possible to integrate a new presentation coming from or proposed by Saeed Yamohammadi. It is possible for everybody to introduce this 4th presentation right now. What do you propose? We have a message from Bull and Kenneth online, who is explaining what happened. Can we invite Saeed Yamohammadi for the 1st presentation, and maybe we let it would be good to have an unshortened presentation, I think.
Yeah, Professor Zanfira Russell Foster will leave us because of another engagement. But we can demand Professor Fitzgerald, if she can do, we just listened to the presentation of Yar Mohammadi, and then the feedback from Professor Fitzgerald, and then we proceed to responses. If you wish, up to you totally, Professor Zanfira.
Everybody agree. I agree. But I think we need a shortened presentation right now, and just a few questions at the end. Please, Saidar Yar Mohammadi.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
We are hearing you.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for being late. I had the difficulty to join you. So I tried to do my presentation shorter than it was just planned, and after that I wait for your question and comments. So I try to make a connection between identity politics and social justice procedures that contribute to populism. As a brief introduction, I might say that I focus on factors contributing to expansion of populist discourse, otherness discourse, and the popular formation of social justice principles are two tendencies I attempt to bring together to analyze the expansion of populist discourse in general and in the context of liberal democracies in particular. First, about the discourse on otherness can be traced in different ways. So we can touch on the ethnography as a tradition of studying others in their respective context. And while ethnography as a sociological methodology has shifted slightly towards Western societies, the view of outsiders as immigrants or other groups has retained its colonial perspective. And the question is to what extent the category of us or the people living in liberal democratic context is perpetuated. By identifying them as a distinct group, a dichotomy between us and them arises, and providing fertile ground for populism. And in this general context, I just focus on identity politics that explains that the we people discourse is articulated around a variety of socio-political cultural characteristics. Identity politics as an attempt to define a homogeneous people, the in-group, emphasizes key fundamental values, even essentializing them while ignoring others or the out-group. And it reinforces the us and them dichotomy in a different manner. And the politicization of this dichotomy explains how it can fuel populism. A shift from agreement on solutions to shared problems to a view where we are different people with incompatible interests takes place as a distinct form of we. In this context, the we becomes political and fragmented, providing fertile ground for the emergence of populist discourse. It is worth mentioning some theories that speculate on this subject. For instance, social identity theory puts forward four key components. One, categorization for grouping ourselves and others. Identification, it is the second component. Strengthening our group ties. 3, social comparison, distinguishing between in-groups and out-groups. And 4, psychological distinctiveness, the need for positive distinction. And in this context, we can just bring into the discussion the formation of social justice principles. This trend of social justice principle formation strengthens the polarization around the politicized understanding of we, the people, in the process of making principles of social justice. We can underline John Rawls's and Jürgen Habermas's political philosophy that argue for democratic participation without ending in populism. In the case of John Rawls, justice can be considered as a result of a political process in a democratic political culture and context. Justice as political concepts connects to central concepts such as reasonable pluralism, overlapping consensus, and public reason, and distinct from a populist concept of democracy. The big challenge here is a democratic participation beyond populism. And when we talk about populist democracy, we can mention that it can be disputed a contrast between this form of democracy, populist democracy, and other forms of the democracy, such as, for example, a Republican view and a liberal egalitarian theory. So, in a populist democracy context, we take the people to a big collective agent. This form of democracy is likely to prevail a polarized society fueled by identity politics. So I make connection between identity politics and a distinct form of democracy, which is populist democracy. And in contrast with other forms, just two examples, Republican view, for example, that justifies democracy as a means to realize non-domination in society by subjecting political institutions to the control of people, or liberal egalitarian theory that based on this partnership conception of democracy, democratic institutions make citizens equal partners in a shared social enterprise for justice. So, for example, in John Rawls' view, the principle of justice become part of a public political culture where consensus about the Constitution arises from an overlapping consensus, and it is based on perception of citizens as free and equal people. But in the context of polarized understanding of we, democratic agreement on the principles of social justice is affected and shifts from individual participation to a choice of principles based on the priorities of groups. This process further fuels populist politics and deepens the already existing divide. So, and in this context, the bottom-up movement, from citizens, the bottom-up movement that seeks to define the principles of social justice in a democratic process within civil society is likely to fail due to the top-down push of identity politics. The failure of this process translates into a worldwide erosion of liberal democratic norms, soaring inequality, and intensified anger and anomie, which offers another possibility for the rise of populism. And in summary, depending on the type of democracy, the principles of social justice can be formulated in different ways. In liberal democratic context, the more these principles, based on a Rawlsian perspective, are the subject of non-democratic consensus, and in the context of polarized conceptions of we the people, the more fertile the ground is for populist discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this shorter presentation. And now I ask again Dr. Jennifer Fitzgerald if it is possible to come with a feedback, a short feedback.
I'm happy to. Thank you. So thank you very much for this thoughtful presentation. And I think I am digesting it. I'm not great on the fly, so I will acknowledge that this will be not entirely satisfactory, but please feel free to stay in touch with me. I'd be so happy to engage with you on this work further. I think this space where identity politics and social justice procedure intersect is very important. And I appreciate the way that you are approaching it with this broad lens. And so that's one thing that I'm struck by right from the start. And I just wanted to have make a couple of suggestions about things from my field. One of the ways I've been approaching these papers has been to think about how might we expand the audience and engage political scientists, which is, where I live, in who do more of the mechanical kind of work, I guess. Anyway, so I was wondering about this concept that you made me think of that David Layton sort of drew from Richard Metzger's anthropological work in China on this concept of culture as points of concern. This concept that to understand the culture of a particular society, you don't focus on what they agree upon, you focus on the things that they disagree about. And I think there's something really interesting here. Oh no, did we lose him? We lost him. So I will email Dr. Yamahamadi, but I think there's something really exciting about the way he's thinking about consensus versus discord and how it helps us understand societies. So that's the big picture. And I also wanted to suggest Envy in Politics by Gwyneth McClendon, which I think is a great answer to social identity theory and the way we use it in our work in understanding mass publics. So I will pause. I'm excited to hear what kind of questions you all have for the authors. Thank you.
Thank you once again. And we open the floor for questions from participants, if any. We don't have written questions until now. Are there questions from our participants for the speakers? If it is not the case, I will invite our speakers to give their answers, and each one of them has only 4 minutes. We will start with the first presenter today, Ariel Lamchani.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Fitzgerald, for your thoughtful comments. A lot of it resonates with me because this project actually came out of a political science class taught by Michael Toms and Paul Schneiderman. So this was very much inspired. Actually, Schneiderman was the one who suggested that you should look at the institutional level of like how people are responding to different cues. And you mentioned earlier that like the social characteristics of the offices. I actually thought that was like very interesting because that was the original vision we had to examine the social identity theory and look at how people are drawing these intergroup kind of affiliation. But the struggle was that in the Conjuring experiment, it was difficult for us to conceptualize how to invoke these intergroup affiliation realistically while also not putting the participants at psychological risk. And so that might be a conversation that we can continue through email. And you mentioned that there's the gender component as well. That also was very interesting, something that we explored, but we didn't find any significant or statistically significant differences in terms of how women or men react to different cues. But we did find that women tend to prioritize relational cues more. So there is maybe a story there to look at how that women, their backgrounds of like prior interaction with types of offices, like you mentioned, the intersection of politics and their know-how of where to go. That might be a story about, even though there is no significant, there is some sort of differences in our gender group that we can explore. And you mentioned that I should expand on the approach intention. I felt a little bit like, whoa, like this is something that has not been seen in the literature. So I was a little bit cautious about doing that, but I'm glad to hear from you that I should maybe talk a little bit more about this new framework. And I think just quickly, finally, you mentioned that to look more into the new political science, what they're exploring about service delivery, but also what they're missing on the communications with the regular folks. And that's where I hope to situate my paper at. So I am just happy to open communication with you and just chat more about this paper. And oh yeah, also talking about comparatives. I think that's exciting.
Thank you very much, Ariel Lamchan. And now, Dr. Mbarga.
Okay, thank you. To me, I just have to thank you for your time and your valuable advice. And I want to assure you that I am still at my earlier stage as a researcher. So your valuable advice will be fully taken into account to enrich and finalize my paper. And if you allow, I will revert back to you if I need more details. So many thanks for your comment and suggestion.
Okay. Dr. Ali Raheb cannot give his answers today. Maybe he will have the occasion to join the next conference, ECPR conference, who knows? And he will have the occasion to meet the discussants and continue the discussions. I'm not sure I'm not sure Said Yarmahomadi get a part or no, get a part of
I'm sorry, I missed it
comments and
completely.
questions coming from Dr. Fitzgerald. It is not the case.
Yeah, I missed your comments, Dr. Fitzgerald, completely. So I didn't. So I got disconnected. I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah, but Dr. Fitzgerald welcomes you to contact her for further discussions if you want to
For sure.
Continue your research.
I sent you an email. Yes, for sure. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much to everyone. And I think now it's time to present my general assessment of presentations and discussions. I have taken some notes in order to be as brief as possible, because I have to give all this final assessment in only 3 minutes. Therefore, if you hear me, yes, thank you. Ariel Lamchan's research, very interesting research. The results of this in-depth study on citizens' behavior, preferences, and orientations toward the state administration, in my view, prompt us to reconsider the need for a democratic model that addresses both representational expectations and demands for efficiency. Today, deficits in representation and deficits in effective governance are equally important, as each can generate both satisfaction and disillusionment, potentially fueling political disengagement, radicalization, and so on and so forth. Diodone Mbarga, or Diodon, I don't know if he's a French name, maybe Diodon Mbarga, our colleague, reminded us of the negative consequences of exclusion and the importance of inclusive democratic institutions. This points to a broader challenge, I would say. When large segments of society are enabled or excluded from meaningful participation in political decision-making, the very foundations of democracy are weakened, of course. Over the past decades, scholars have observed similar dynamics in other contexts, and I have also presented some context within my presentation for another panel here for ECPS. Parties and representative institutions increasingly struggle to mediate between citizens and the state, losing connection with the broader society. This growing disconnect fuels citizens' skepticism, erodes trust, and contributes to a more critical stance toward democratic regimes worldwide, not only in the United States or Europe, as we can observe today once more. Ali Rahab's analysis of the constitutional revolution in Iran 100 ago shows that the failure of this modernizing project stemmed largely from the deliberate narrowing of the definition of the people and the erosion of pluralism. Revolutionary leaders excluded the very groups that had driven the revolution, based on class, gender, religious, and ethno-national lines, preventing their lasting political inclusion. Very interesting case. I didn't know the case until now. This case highlights, in my view, that exclusion from participatory demos, rather than popular backwardness or external pressures, can undermine both democratic legitimacy and societal cohesion. It is strikingly relevant today, I would add, as systematic exclusion also operated through identity politics, as Said Yarmohammadi showed. So this systematic exclusion may help explain why large segments of the population align with anti-system or populist movements and distrust institutions. In conclusion, these reflections invite us to critically examine the competing conceptions of democracy circulating today, both in academic debate and public discourse. They encourage us to consider the roles of the demos, of the political parties, representative institution, of the constitution, and emerging political and non-political actors whose influence over decision-making and governance is growing, isn't it? Keeping in mind that citizens' expectations encompass both representation and efficiency, that exclusion from meaningful participation undermines legitimacy, and that narrowing the definition of the people can erode pluralism and fuel distrust or alignment with anti-system movements. What are the advantages and limitations of different democratic models, from pluralist representative to elitist, technocratic, or epistemocratic, and so on and so forth? How do these models shape inclusion, representation, efficient governance, especially in an era characterized by the challenges of post-democracy, especially in these very polarized times? This is a very challenging question. It appears that the numerous questions, in fact, remain unanswered until now, and further research is required to address these challenges comprehensively. We still have much work ahead of us, don't we, ECPS, sorry. Thank you all for today's presentations, for the discussions. It was a pleasure for me to be part of this team, of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zamfira. Dear presenters, thank you for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. I would also like to thank our discussants for their precise and interesting assessments. We warmly invite you to join us for the next ECPS virtual workshop on February 19th, 2026, where the session will explore decolonizing democracy, governance, identity, and resistance in the global South. We encourage you to register and take part in this important conversation. I wish you all a great rest of the day. Thank you.